our house was washed away in the flood in 28. Where the city dump was.
Mhm.
Okay, the first house after that was Uncle Cliff and Aunt Nellie.
Uh-huh.
The next house was Georgie and Sis. And then the third house was our house. There were 3 houses along there.
So would the third house be the one that's there now? That
There,
Buck
no, there
lives
are
in?
no houses there now.
Oh, because there were 3 houses, and then there was the next one.
No, you know
river.
where I told you where that first drive to
Right,
go up?
yeah.
Between there and the dump, in that area, there were 3 houses.
Wow.
Because when my folks got married, Grandpa had already built a house for Charlie and Manda
Mm-hmm.
there. I hate to put it this way, but Grandpa wanted to build my folks a house there too. But my mother, being Italian, also knew what came with that, how the daughter-in-law becomes a slave to the mother-in-law. And she says, I don't want to be that close to your mother. There's a little house way out by the river that we can fix up, and so that's what they did. And then he built a house for Aunt Nellie and Uncle Cliff out there. And then when George and Sis got married, he built a house for them out there. So there were 3 houses up
right.
there.
Kind of a family compound.
Right.
So I know you were too young to probably directly remember the flood, but what about flood stories? Do you have?
Yeah, from what the folks said, as it is now, you went in that entry, and then there was a frontage road because there was a ditch between the Chambersburg and the houses. There was a frontage road there. They called us and told us that the dam had broken, and everybody came over to our house, and they were all sitting there discussing, well, it cannot possible. It's only been completed for about a week. No way. And so the men said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go out and drive up along the river and see if we see any water coming. And Dad said they stepped outside and they could hear it coming.
Oh.
Sis had already pulled her car out and was parked in the driveway. And so the 3 women and the 2 children, because young Cliff was, the 3 women and the 2 children got in the first car and went out. My dad backed our car out and he came out. And then Uncle Cliff and Georgie were in Cliff's car, and they were the 3rd car. And Dad said as they were going up to high ground, up south, he could see their headlights in his rearview mirror, and then all of a sudden he couldn't see them anymore because the water hit them and swept them off the road.
Did they survive at all?
Cliff managed to swim out, but George didn't. When they found his body, he had a big bruise on his head, Dad said, so he must have gotten hit by something.
Something somewhere along the line. What about the aftermath? How long did it take to recover, and what did you all do to live?
Well, my mother's folks, my grandfather Matino had the ranch where Jimmy Shields' house is. He had that plus where the dressers, and they were living up at the dresser's house.
And was the dresser's house on the hill?
On the hill,
yeah,
where Joe Boker lives, I think now. They were living there. Grandpa had bought that place in 1920, and came from Moore Park, and so he was farming there. So when they left, they tried to go to my other grandparents' house, and they couldn't because there where the amens are now.
Yeah.
It goes down. Well, the water was all in there.
Yeah.
So they couldn't get up to the dresser to my grandparents. So they turned up the road and they went up to Bill Elkin's house up the road, and that's where they stayed that night.
So what happened after that? How did they recover?
Well, Mother had worked for Mr. McLean at the Mercantile, so they rented the house next to Aunt Rosie's, between Aunt Rosie's and that alleyway. They rented that house and they lived there for 6 months while the house up here was being built. And that's why Aunt Rosie kept me, because Mother went back to work and Mr. McLean let her use his she went down to L.A. to the warehouses, and he let her use his credentials to buy stuff wholesale down the.
Oh, that was very good of him.
Yeah, so so that's, and then of course, and then the city of Los Angeles built our house for us, and Mother said that they made you draw a floor plan of your house, and she said some people, the amount of furniture they claimed that they lost, they had to be stacked 3 deep in the house because.
Oh.
But Uncle Harry, so the city of Los Angeles built that house, and where Slimers live now on Kensington, that was Aunt Nellie and Uncle Cliff's house, and the city of Los Angeles built those houses, but Uncle Harry, who was a contractor, he would come by every evening and say to my dad, well, tomorrow you have him do this, and you have him do that, and you have him do this. And so he did that with Uncle Cliff, too. So those houses were very well built.
That was good. Harry, last name?
Hastings.
Hastings.
My grandfather.
Yeah. As a kid, you grew up then in Fillmore itself. So where did you go to school? And
well, for the first, the 1A and the 1B and the 1A and the 2B was at Mountain View. And then they built because in those days, the first and second grade was a Mountain View and just the main building down on Sespe, and that was the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. And then they built that little addition, and they moved the first and second grade down there. So I went for the 2A, I was down at Sespe Street.
Well, we went to school a little later than you did, and we still went down there. So they must have had a population. Must have had more kids come in because we went to school at the old Mountain View School as well for the first 2 grades.
But after we moved out, that became the Mexican school.
Okay. Do you know how long?
But we were bused from Bardsdale, that's why we went there.
Oh, I had never thought about that. So the busing kids came to Mountain View
because Buck and Wanda went down there where I was, because that was at that time that was the Mexican school.
Yeah.
Actually, they say it was Mexican school, but it was for the Spanish-speaking children. If you could speak English and take instruction in English, you went to the Sespe Street School. Because we had quite a few Spanish Mexican children in our class, but they were all children who could speak English and take instruction in English.
I guess I was pretty oblivious to anything other than the kids that were in our class at Mountain View School. Teachers, you remember names of teachers?
I had in the first grade Mrs. Middlesworth.
So did we.
So did we.
Huh?
We did too.
Who was the wife of my aunt's husband. Aunt Mary was married to Earl Middlesworth, and later he married Mrs. Middlesworth. That was the 1A, 1B. 1A was Miss Setzer. 2B was Miss Fabian. 2A was Mrs. Chalou. They had a general store. Her husband's family had a general store in Piru. And later they sold that and had a store down in Vista where my maternal grandparents had moved. So I would visit her whenever I was Sheffield. That was Sheffield. That was Sheffield's and had Mrs. Then, of course, Aunt Iona was my 3B.
Yeah.
Miss Morrison, 3A.
What was the difference between A and B? Just semesters, or did you split half a year?
In those days, they started a class in February as well as September. And the reason that I was the youngest one in my high school class, because in order to start the first grade in February, you had to be 6 by April 1, and my birthday was March 31. So I just got to start when I was still 5.
Mhm.
And Billy Mae Elkins was her birthday is the 19th of March, so she was in that class. So when we started in February, we ended in February naturally. Then we went up to the junior high, and we were only in the 7th grade from February to June. In September, we were in the 8th grade.
Interesting situation. You only had a half a year of 7th grade.
Right.
Did you miss anything?
I don't think so.
As a kid, what were your favorite things to do? What was there to do in Fillmore when you were a kid?
Well, you know, as I tell everybody, I didn't know what the front yard looked like until I went to grammar school. I did go to the ranch,
Mm-hmm.
and I would go. Of course, Buck and Maxine were over there, and so I would go to the ranch on weekends. And then when Mother she started working at the Sprouse Rights. I think when I was in about the 4th grade. And so when I would get through with school, I would walk down to the store and go back in the storeroom and do my homework until Dad got off work, and then he would pick me up. And
What are your impressions of downtown Fillmore, the business district, and the businesses that were there when you were growing up?
well, let me see. When I was growing up, there was the United Mercantile. Up on the corner was a restaurant,
Yeah.
and it burned down one night. And according to that book, evidently it was a restaurant that Biz Basolo owned before he had the one out here on the corner of Clay and Main. La Tapatia.
I don't remember that.
La Tapatia was at the corner of
Maine.
Mrs. Jarrett used to take her Spanish class there all the time. And everybody wanted to know what La Tapatia meant. We said it meant the greasy spoon. Anyway, but according to that book, the Centennial, he had a restaurant up there. And then there was a tobacco store. No, there was Servas's barber shop, and then a tobacco store. Then George's Palmer's barber shop. Then the pool hall and Maxwell's shoe shop. Then the A&P. Well, was it the?
Was that where the United Mercantile
I think
was?
that was probably where the United Mercantile was.
That's the one that collapsed in the last earthquake, and
yeah,
it's total. The building's totally gone.
Yeah, and then there were from there on down. Oh, Jack Ray had a shoe store across from the theater, and then of course the Greeks had the sweet shop, and in between was Ben Klotz's dry cleaning, and then past that Coors barber shop, Clough's drugstore, and then at one time Betty Ipswich had a restaurant, and then the market on the end, and on the other side it was pretty much the Security Bank, Hickey Brothers, the gas company, Lindenfeld's.
Okay, that was where M&M was, right? Lindenfeld's was the M&M market, or eventually became the M&M market?
It could be, but Lindenfeld's had the grocery and produce. Coleman had a butcher shop, and Ball's had a bakery in the center.
Oh, that was before we were aware. Yeah.
Because whenever we would go out to the Alamo on deer hunting, they would go into Lindenfeld's in the evening to buy all their supplies. And then there was some accountants next to the Lindenfeld's, and then Jones's Market.
Oh, I remember that.
There was Jones's Market, and then the Sprouse Rights was next to that, and then Ellsworth's Hardware, and the Show, and then Jesse's, or
Or yeah,
Or
or the
Beverly's.
pharmacy, nor yeah.
And then I can't remember what was it. Then Smith's,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Toggery, Sherry's had the Toggery, and then the bank.
And then the bank. When you go north, there was the grocery store. It was probably Adamson when you were growing up.
Well, yeah. In fact, before that, it was Wyman's.
Mm-hmm.
My mother worked at Wyman's until they closed, and that's when Mr. McLean came up and said he understood Wyman's was closing, so he asked her to go work for him.
Mm-hmm.
So she was working there because she did not like my dad. Because, well, she and Aunt Nellie were the same age. And Dad was 4 years older. And whenever the Matinos would come over to visit the Basolos, of course, Nellie and my mother would be playing, and you know how the boys are with younger girls, they tease them miserably. And Mother couldn't stand my dad. And when she would come out of work from Wyman's, she would look down the street because the pool hall was over where Ellsworth's, in those days, where Ellsworth's was. She would look down there. If she saw my dad standing in front of the pool hall, she would go the other way to go home.
But he had to come home eventually.
Huh?
He had to come home eventually.
They weren't married then.
They weren't married then.
This is before they
It
were
was
married.
before
This is when they were kids.
How did it come about that they could stand each other to get married?
Well, this is the story. First of all, when my mother's family, and when my grandfather came to this country, my mother's father, he came in 1903 when Mother was only 3 months old. And in 1909, he sent for my mother and grandmother, and he was working on the Pettit Reimer Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There was a grammar school down where Balcom Canyon Road hits South Mountain Road.
Now that you have just solved a mystery for us. There was a school there, Riverside School District.
There was a school there. Mother went to school there.
Wow.
Grandpa, they got here in January, and Mother said Grandpa took her down to that schoolhouse and told the teacher she doesn't speak a word of English, but I just want her to sit in the class and hear English going on around her. So my mother said she sat there and she sang songs, having no idea what she was saying. But by June, she could take instruction in English.
Yeah. Full immersion will do that. Full immersion will do that. Absolutely. Do you have any photos of that school?
No. Because any photos that we had went
down the river. Yeah.
So how did the Basolos and your mother's family get those two together?
Well, first of all, my grandfather, Matino, told me that when my grandmother and grandmother were coming to this country, he needed a cow because they was going to have a child, and so they needed. So as he was walking one day from Fillmore back over there, as he went by the Basolo Ranch, he saw they had a sign up that said "Cow for Sale." So he said he walked in there, and he says, "You don't know how surprised I was to walk into that yard, and here were all the kids speaking my native language." He said it really. So from that point on, the Basolos and the Matinos were visited back and forth all the time. So as I said, my grandfather had that place where Jimmy Shields and the dressers were, and the Basolos down here. One day, Grandma Basolo called up Grandma Matino and said, "Carlo and I are going to go roller skating in Ventura tonight. Would you like to go?" My grandfather wouldn't go. He didn't believe in this foolishness. So Grandma said, "Oh yeah, I'd like to go." And she said, "Oh, by the way, Biz is going to be driving us, so maybe Marion would like to go too." And Grandma said, "Okay." So that evening, up drives my dad, and Grandma goes out and says, "Well, where's Carlo and Nina?" Well, they decided not to go. Grandma Matino said, "Well, I'm not going to go either then." And Mother said, "Well, I'm not going." And Mother said, Grandma said, "Oh, go ahead. So she said she did. They went road. She said, "I sat over here and he sat over there. If he'd made one move, that would have been the end of it." 4 months later, they were married.
Incredible.
Their mothers did it. Their mothers did
You
it.
talk about a set-up marriage.
They planned ahead. Oh, shoot. That's a great story. What do you remember, or what are the family stories of the Depression? How did it hit the family?
You know, I don't think the Depression bothered us, and I'll tell you why. Because all the damage was done in the flood in 28, the city paid for. In fact, that's how come Grandpa Basolo managed to buy the Horton place, is because of the money he got, because the trees were wiped out. So they had planted new trees. So while the trees were growing to production, they were being paid by the city of Los Angeles. So we really didn't feel the Depression that I can recall. Mother said that Christmas, that the year that they got all the money from Los Angeles, that Christmas was the best Christmas we kids ever had, because they bought us all kinds of toys and what have you. So I figure that the Depression really didn't bother us. I do remember that my dad was working on the ranch and being paid $35 every other week. Mother was working at Sprouts Rights and getting $16 a week, which would be $32. They raised her to 18, so she was making more than he was. That kind of bugged him.
How did they reclaim the land that was lost in the flood? How did they physically do it?
Well, like I see that block where the airport was in the alfalfa, that block really didn't come back. They didn't start redeveloping that until in the early 40s.
Did they find a way to get the dirt back? Did they feed some of the river in to do that?
I don't know how they
because
ever since I could, when I can start remembering about the early 30s, the orchards were all in.
Everything was coming back. What did you
Although they did raise the Horton place, they raised beans up there, pinto beans.
And your story of the water coming in right there along Giberson Road, right up to the hillside at Jimmy Shields,
right?
That answers a lot of questions that I had about where that water actually came in, because it really didn't hit us at all. It bounced, but it bounced on the east and then came around on the west.
I think what happened was when it first hit the bridge held for a while and forced the water
back
around. And that's why our place got washed out. And then when the bridge went, then
it all just went down the river. Do you remember crossing on the swinging bridge at all?
I remember going across on the trolley.
On the trolley.
Because in they were picking lemons at the ranch that year. And so the pickers would walk across from Fillmore on the swinging bridge and pick the lemons. Then we would have to haul the lemons over to Moore Park, down to Montalvo, across the river at Montalvo, and back up this side to the packing house. You could make about one trip a day.
Doing it the hard way.
Right.
Oh, shoot. You said you went deer hunting. Did you hike a lot in the Sespe? Did you hunt up there?
No, we, there was a gentleman, Rehart's, up, well, you probably know the Rehart, maybe you don't, but Rehart's had a ranch. She was related somehow to the Goodnuffs. They were up Sespe. He had been Mr. Rehart had made a camp out at the Alamo on Alamo Creek. They had taken logs and roped off, fenced off an area, and they had hauled out at one point an old wood stove, and that was collapsible, and there was a little cave down on the creek a ways, and we called it the cache, because we didn't have to take out utensils because they had done that, so everything was cached in that cave. And every year when we would go out, we would go bring everything out. Now there was a spring within this fenced-in area that went into the Alamo Creek. So what we would do we would take the horses and the mules. One day they would ride them from Fillmore out to Squaw Flat and spend the night. Then they would drive out with a truck with all the supplies. And then we would load the animals there at Squaw Flat, and it would take us another day to get to Alamo Creek. Nowadays you can come in from the other side on the main road, but anyway, it took us 2 days to get out there.
Did you do it a lot? Was it something you did every year?
Every year,
What else did you do as growing up in Fillmore? I mean, did you swim in the pool? Did you swim up at Swallow's Nest?
Swallow's Nest. We went to Swallow's Nest.
Has it been washed out? Do you?
Yeah,
has
it's
it
washed
gone?
out. Another place we used to swim was called the Clay Banks.
Where's that?
Do you know where the Peyton's house is? Not Doris is up on the highway, but the one down by the river. Okay, there was clay banks there, and there were some eucalyptus trees, and there was a pool there, and they had ropes hanging from the trees, and we would swing out and drop into the water.
That sounds like fun.
But we would go. Lloyd Perkins used to have us come out. We would go from his place over there.
Do you know anything about Wiley Lake?
Yes, but we used to go up there and have parties up there. There was a tree house there too, as I recall. Was it
accessible by vehicle, or did you have to ride?
No, it was accessible by vehicle.
It's all blocked off now. I don't even know if the lake is still there.
I don't know either. I don't. In fact, I don't even know which canyon it's up anymore. I was up somewhere behind Les Shields' house, up in that area someplace.
It's another one of those things where it's too bad everybody puts fences out everywhere. Right. We were talking earlier about businesses in town, and you mentioned restaurants. Can you think of other restaurants that were?
The Sisters Cafe. The Bell Sisters had the Sisters Cafe. It was in about where what's there now? Probably where the post office is now.
Others?
Whitey's.
Where was that?
Okay, Whitey's started, those little buildings up on Sespe, next to on the corner of Sespe and Orchard was Mrs. Spinsky's. We used to get our penny candy there. And next to that, up to where Dr. Nelson's house was, there were a couple of cement block buildings in there, and Whitey started out in one of those.
And then went to where?
Down where the king down here on
Kenpo Karate building, and that eventually was Henry's then.
Henry's, right? Right.
And was the Twin Tanks there when you were growing up?
Yeah, Twin Tanks were out there.
And it was then a restaurant. Do you have any idea what the Twin Tanks was before it was a restaurant?
Well, originally there was a cracking plant there, and I don't know what a cracking plant was, but I was understood that the natural gas line, moisture would form, and the cracking plant was a place where they took the moisture out of the gas. But that's what was there originally.
So do you think the tanks held fuel, oil, or something?
I don't know what the tanks were there for, but there was a cracking plant there at one time.
North Fillmore, were restaurants down there?
No, I asked my dad once. He used to refer to it as Tipperary.
Why? I've heard the name, but why did they call it that? Do you know?
Because there was a dance hall down there called the Tipperary, and that used to refer to North Fillmore as Tipperary.
Do you know anything about the dance hall that was in Bardsdale, somewhere close to the elementary school?
No.
Church. You went to church where?
Well, Mrs. Yakel. And that's something I wanted to ask. In that book, it said that Yakel's house was down on where Aunt Rosie's house was. Was that true? Did they live there before? And then they moved up in the 1920s. They moved up on the hill.
We better tell where Aunt Rosie's house was.
Santa Clara.
Santa Clara, Santa Clara Street, 2 doors up from Orchard
Okay.
on the north side of Santa
Clara
Clara.
Street. Okay. Okay, so where were we? We were talking about Mrs. Jekyll.
Mrs. Jekyll. Unfortunately, the Basolos were didn't go to church that often, and my grandfather on my mother's side that family didn't go to church much either. So Mrs. Jekyll used to drive down and pick me up and take me to the Catholic church.
The one that's up
for Mass.
On Central and...
Up on T-Sorts, up on the hill.
Oh, where up?
Mrs. Jekyll lived
was
up
on the
there.
hill, but the church was the one
church was on the first and Central, yeah. And I used to go there every Thursday. We would go there for catechism after school.
Yeah, of course they've done away with that now, but yeah, we went to the church across the street. We all marched up from Sespe School to the churches to go to your case catechism and whatever they called it for us. Religious release, what a nondescript name. As you got older, you stayed in Fillmore and worked here?
No.
You commuted what?
When I graduated from high school, I turned 17 on the 31st of March and graduated in June. So I had a year before I was drafted. So I went to Occidental for 3 semesters. And then when I was drafted, I went in the service. And when I came back out of the service, I went to UCLA. And from there, I lived in Ventura then for the rest of it.
What did you do? What was your job? What did you finally do in Ventura when you were
worked for Bank of America?
Experiences during World War II. You were drafted, and where did they send you?
I did my basic at Camp Roberts, and I was in my 3rd week of basic when the war ended in Japan. I tell them that I was on the rifle range, and when the Japanese found out what my score was on the rifle range, they gave up. But anyway, so I was and it just so happened that the battalion in which I was training, when we finished training, they all went to Japan for occupation trips, but our platoon sergeant was from San Fernando, and one summer he'd worked on the ranch. So when they all went to Japan, he kept me at Camp Roberts as an instructor. So I stayed. We closed up Camp Roberts, and then they sent me to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I spent the rest of my time at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Your timing was perfect. Let's see. What have we not covered that you'd like to tell us about?
Oh, let me see.
Maybe personages here in Fillmore, people that you remember when you were growing up, city managers, city councils, any major issues that were going on that you remember?
Oh, no.
Town characters.
Town characters.
Huh?
Who were the town characters?
Well,
remember anything about Sweetie Pie?
Sweetie Pie, Buck and I, when made sweet, they used to haul trees over, and he would have a big pile of trees that he was waiting to dispose of. And one day when Buck and I were hauling some rubbish from the ranch out there, as we went by those trees, we tossed the match in, and I thought he'd have a fit when that thing took off.
Do you remember what his name was, his real name?
No. All we know was Sweetie Pie.
Do you know when he came?
No.
Do you know anything about when he died? He's a mystery.
Yeah.
He really is. We have a picture, but that's it.
There was Con Mossbarger.
The movers. Con and his brother would move people.
They were movers?
They
were movers?
Yeah, Con and his father and brother.
Yeah. Anything Anything stands out about those people? Stories?
Well, I remember the girls. You know the old story about if you got Prince Albert in a can, we'll let him out. The girls used to call up the pool hall and say, "Is my daddy there?" "No, I don't know. Who is your daddy?" "Count Mossberger."
Oh dear.
John the Greek.
Huh?
John the
John the
Greek.
Greek.
John the Greek down here.
Hmm. What about his family? Did they?
I don't know anything about his family. Chappie said that when he died, some nephew from Greece got the property and came over. But Chappie says he was very frugal.
I just remember that he was there.
Yeah.
City people like Fergus Fairbanks, you remember him?
No, they were all.
They were all too old by the time.
Yeah. I remember John Galvin.
Mm-hmm.
And Fred Bryce.
What about high school? Tell us about going to Fillmore High School.
Well,
Favorite teachers, favorite things that you did? Did you do any of the dramatic productions that they did in the high school?
oh, let me see. I was in a Christmas pageant. Chappie and I were in a Christmas pageant. I was in the senior play.
So you and Chappie are about 4 years apart?
Yeah,
About
just
4
about.
years.
Well, Virginia was in my class.
Yeah, okay, because you would have known Jimmy then, Jimmy Fansler.
Oh yeah, Jimmy. I knew Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Mary Jane was in my class
Yeah.
too. And
Best teacher.
huh?
The best teacher that you had in the 4 years.
Oh boy. I have no idea. The teacher that I disliked the most was Andy Ross.
And why? Why?
Because he was a grouch. Mr. Stahl was good.
Yeah.
I like Mr. Stahl. Mr. Marple.
You brought a folder. Is there something in the folder you want to talk about?
What I was doing was making a critique for what I need to know about if when people come in, do they you take them on a tour? I take it.
You mean for the museum itself?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But when we have people come in and talk like this, we just sit and talk and try and remember things and get a feel for what Fillmore was like.
Yeah.
In your case, it would have been in the 30s and 40s.
Right.
And then you left for Ventura. So was there anything that happened in Fillmore while you were living in Ventura that is memorable to you? What about the flooding in '69, the really bad floods that we've had over the years here?
Okay, 69, we lost quite a bit of, we had quite a bit of damage out at the ranch. There were a couple of dead cows in our orchard, and we had to push a lot of the silt back out into the river. And of course, the levee had been washed out.
Yeah.
We had to put back in a levee. When I told you about hauling the lemons over, and you're going across the swinging bridge.
Yeah, and that was 38. That was 1938 that all that, yeah.
38, yeah. 69. Okay. 69. The Sespe didn't wash out in '69.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, well, the bridge didn't wash out either, but it did go over the river.
Mhm.
My dad had said, because we had '69, we had 200-year storms within a month of one another. And when the first storm that hit filled up Piru,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad said they better let some of that water out, because if we have another storm, it's all going to come. Well, it did.
Yeah. And it did a lot of damage everywhere
Right.
down the river.
Down the river. Because I remember Ventura just wiped out the marina.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
What about earthquakes? Any damage on the ranches during earthquakes, or?
I remember the 32 earthquake, 32 or 33, the one in Compton.
Oh, yeah.
And then I remember what was it, the 51 earthquake at Tehachapi?
Mm-hmm.
Because we were staying at, that night we were staying at my in-laws out on Muir Road, and the house was so old. When we woke up, we thought the house had fallen down because that the foundation had given way. But I remember the 33 earthquake was in the afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember, the bluff. You could see
You could see everything coming down off of the bluff. It was in the afternoon. Was it during school hours? Were you in school?
It was in about 4 in the afternoon, because I was in the living room working on a jigsaw puzzle on the card table, and my mother came flying through the kitchen and grabbed me, and outside we went. So that's all I can remember.
Mm-hmm. No damage to the house at the time. No. Did Fillmore take much damage in that
No,
earthquake?
I don't think so.
No, it was too far away, probably.
Right.
Well, we've been at this for almost an hour. Is there anything, like I said, is there anything you can think of that you'd like to bring up that we haven't covered?
Well, you knew, of course, Ed Burson used to run cattle back in the forest.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you knew that or not. And there was Squaw Flat, and then the next place was Bucksnort.
Mm-hmm.
And Cow Springs is well. Ed Burson had a cabin out at Bucksnort, and he ran cattle out there, and we would go out occasionally and help him round up.
Uh-huh.
And we would go all the way up to the hot springs to looking for cattle.
Did that happen very often, that you were on a crew like that was out doing a roundup?
I think we only went out there a couple of times, but what they used to do is all the people who ran cattle would get together for roundups.
Uh-huh.
Like the Arndales, we would come across and help the Arndale, because Dad and Uncle Charlie were running cattle up here on where the F is, that piece of property. Gene Percy, I don't know if you know where Gene Percy's place is. Way
up there.
We would go up there and help them occasionally, because actually we this Texaco piece here went up to the dry lakes.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was a space, and then over Tom's Canyon was a branch off of Hopper, and you went up Tom's Canyon to get to Gene Percy's place. We also had cattle over in Tom's Canyon. And so what we would do when we would round up over there is we would go up Pole Creek and cut across above the falls over into that first canyon, and then go on over to Tom's Canyon to gather the cattle in.
What did you do with the cattle? Where did you sell them? Or where did they sell them? Do you know?
Well, usually when we rounded up, we had to drive all of those cattle back over to Pole Creek because we shipped out of the corral there at Pole Creek. When my dad bought cattle, they came in by railway because there was corrals down here
Uh-huh.
by the ice house.
Where was the ice house?
The ice house was about where those sycamore trees are,
Oh, so it was along the railroad tracks?
along the railroad track.
And it would have been east of the depot.
Yeah, east of the depot. And then next to the ice house was the corrals.
Mm-hmm.
And they would load on the train there. In the ice house, when we would go deer hunting, then the deer that they shot, they would bring down and hang in the ice
In
house.
the ice house. Do you have any idea when the ice house was built?
No.
Do you know when it disappeared?
Uh-uh.
Well, at least we know where it was, because that was a question I had asked, or somebody had asked me not too long ago where it was.
Yeah, it was there.
And we had no idea. Was there a guy that still was making ice house deliveries?
You could buy the cube, the big box of ice there.
Did they deliver to houses around?
I don't know whether they did or not, because we didn't. When my folks first built that house in 28, they had an ice box. But by the time that I could remember, we had a refrigerator.
Yeah.
And I do remember Jack Kastner had a livery stable over here.
Where?
On Main Street.
Uh-huh.
On the corner of Fillmore, no, on the corner of Saratoga and Main.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Kastner's house was there. Then next to him had been the old livery stable, which he turned into a garage, because my dad had an old Model T pickup that had a canvas top, and he used to rent space there at the garage for his pickup so that it would be out of the rain when it rained.
When you learned to drive, did you drive a car with the pedals that went forward and back? Was it hard to learn to drive?
Stick shift, yeah.
Yeah. My mother talked about learning to drive, and there was a pedal that put forward and a pedal to push the car backwards.
No, no. No, we had the gears.
You had the gear shift. Anyway, she took the back porch off the house.
Yeah.
She got confused.
My mother said that she came home from school one day and nobody was around, so she got in the car and she drove it, and she wound up down in the field with stock.
Learning to drive was not easy in those days.
No, I learned to drive going up between us and the Bursons on that road. That's where I learned to drive.
The dirt road, yeah. The dirt road up through the ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember. Angelina. The Jim Shields family had a habit of riding their horses down that road and coming through the yard, and Angelina would just have a fit every time they came through.
When I was a kid, they used to do that. When I was a kid, they used to do that. She would get on the phone.
Do what?
They used to do that when I was a kid and lived out there. She would get on the phone and let them have it.
When was the two-story house built on that property?
Beg pardon?
When was the two-story house built?
I don't know. Dad said that they came home from school one day and the house had burnt down. Wherever the house was, I don't know. And so Grandpa bought the materials and the farmers put up the house. And you could tell that the farmers put up the house because that one bedroom upstairs, the chimney went right through the middle of the room. You could walk all around the chimney.
And they lived in the house for...
Huh?
They lived in the house for how long?
Oh, I don't know.
Forever.
Until it fell apart.
Yeah. With all their children.
And I know that it was built before they had indoor plumbing because there was a bathroom in that house. And I never could figure out why you walked into the bathroom and here was the bathtub over here and over there a commode and over here. What it was they just turned a bedroom into a bathroom.
Oh.
One of the downstairs bedrooms.
The one behind the kitchen.
Yeah, behind the kitchen off the service porch. You would go from the kitchen, you went into where the stairs went up the middle of the house, but there was a door that went on through to the bathroom.
So when was the house built that you lived in?
That's the one Biz was talking about that Uncle Charlie and Amanda built.
Okay.
Yeah, Grandpa built for them.
Yeah.
And that must have been what, in the 21, 20, well, I don't know when they were married. Maxine.
We lived there in the 40s, so it must have been built in the 20s, I would think.
Well, Maxine was,
They were raised there.
he built it for them when they got married.
Yeah.
So, and Maxine was born, what, 24, 23, 24?
So it had to be the early
Yeah.
20s.
So the
Early
two-story
20s.
house, predated that by
Mhm.
quite
Yeah.
some period of time.
Mhm.
Was there a water well in the middle there, a pump house or something?
Yeah, there was
Tank
there was a well, windmill that
Mhm.
pumped water, and the tank house with the tank above the tank house. And I asked my dad one day, I said, Dad, what did you do for like drinks, for beer? How'd you keep your beer cold?
In the tank house.
And he said what we did was we would go over to Lager Messino's Saloon in Oxnard, and we would buy the beer, and the beer bottles they packed in sawdust in barrels. And he said we would haul that back, and then we would keep it in the tank house, because whenever the tank overflowed and the water came down over the tank house, it kept it cool in there.
So it overflowed a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can end this if
Okay.
you're agreeable.
Good enough.